History 1. During the pandemic, I thought it would be fun to get a job at a local haunted house attraction. My friend Laura was already working there, and she told me they were looking for new actors and actresses. She pulled some strings and got me a job after I met with the owner. There were multiple sections to the haunted house attraction, including 3 haunted houses and a haunted corn maze. On my first day on the job, there was some slight rehearsing of my character and just demonstrating my acting skills to one of the supervisors who was on duty. My role for the night was assigned to be a damsel in distress, and this meant I was going to be tied to a pole and yelling at the guests to help me as they walked past me. Of course, all guests would be told before entering not to touch any of the actors or actresses, so they would know not to actually untie me when I'm screaming, "Help me." Before opening time, the supervisor, a coordinator named Greg, walked me to my post. Quite literally, my post, because I'd be tied to a wooden post in the corn maze. I was honestly surprised that I actually had to be tied up and not just pretend. I asked how I would go to the bathroom and such, and he said there would be short breaks between sessions. He also said there would be another supervisor nearby if I should need anything, which made me feel a little better. Once he walked away, I was left alone. There were a bunch of sound effects and scary ambiance loops echoing through the cornfield from the various speakers hidden throughout the maze. Pretty soon, a little air horn sounded in the distance, indicating that the attraction was open and to get into character. I was nervous but excited. Since I was more so in the middle of the corn maze, it wasn't until a few minutes passed that the first guests would be passing me. I started to put on my best performance as a damsel in distress, so I screamed and fake cried, begging everyone who passed for help, saying, "He's coming back soon, untie me." Some people would play along and say things back, and I would improvise responses in character. Everyone was wearing face masks because of the pandemic, so I couldn't see people's entire faces. Eventually, 2 male guests who looked to be in their 30s walked past, looking at me without saying a word. One of them slowed down and just shot me this gaze with his big eyes that quite honestly creeped me out. They kept walking and disappeared further into the maze. This was around the time I was starting to realize there would be long gaps between guests sometimes. I could suddenly hear someone brushing through the crops nearby. I was wondering if it was a staff member. The guests weren't supposed to stray off the path. I turned completely around and saw 2 men emerging from the crops towards the pole I was tied to, the same 2 men from before. Something wasn't right. I broke character and said, "You guys can't stray off the path." Then one of them laughed under their mask, and the 2 men started speaking in some other language, I think Russian. Then one of them walked back to the path, but in the opposite direction that the guests are supposed to go. He just started standing there, keeping watch, it seemed, while the other one started to inappropriately grab me. I knew what was happening immediately, and I started screaming bloody murder, saying, "Help! This isn't part of the act." I called out things like, "I'm being assaulted." Moments later, one of the supervisors emerged, seeing if I was okay. By then, the 2 men had already run away. I was untied and escorted out of the maze. I called my parents, and they insisted I just leave right then. I left, and Greg and one of the other supervisors said I'd be paid for the night, and if I didn't want to come back, they'd understand, but to just keep them in the loop. I wish I could say it was over, though. On my drive home, I was extra cautious to make sure I wasn't being followed. I noticed halfway home that the same white car was behind me the whole time. I started making turns down random streets, and when the white car stayed behind me every single time, I knew I was being followed. I knew I had to find the nearest police precinct, so I typed in police station on Google Maps and started driving to it. They followed me the whole way until I pulled into the parking lot of the precinct. Then they kept driving. I never saw the car again. I sat in my car for 10 minutes before finally turning it back on and driving home, confirming every few seconds that I wasn't being followed. I didn't return to work at that haunted house attraction again. History 2. For just 2 years, there was this pop-up haunted house attraction that would open in October. It was unofficially called Haunted Hill Manor, because there was a sign that looked like it was bought from a party store or something. It was propped up in front by the parking area, and it read, Haunted Hill Manor. The parking lot wasn't really a parking lot at all. just a grassy field designated as a parking area. This was the year they closed down, and it was also the year my friends and I decided to go. I went with John, Dave, and Rick. We went on a Thursday night because we were in college, and all of us had Fridays off. It was definitely quieter than it would have been on a weekend. Surprisingly, there was no line for the ticket stand, and when we followed the directions to the entrance, there was only a very short line there. I'd say maybe 4 people ahead of us. What we didn't realize was that they were only letting one person in at a time. We had no idea that was part of this haunted house. If anything, this would make it scarier. We shoved Dave in front to go first. I was second to last with Rick behind me. Every couple of minutes they would tell the next person to go in. When John went in ahead of me, I actually started to get nervous. I hadn't done a haunted house since I was a kid and was with my family then. It was my turn to go in. This woman dressed in a bloodied costume opened the door and told me to enter. I stepped through the door, and as it shut behind me, I found myself in a dark building lit up mainly by small flashing lights. As I walked through, I encountered a bunch of gruesome props of mutilated corpses and other horrific things. Once in a while, actors dressed in scary costumes would jump out from around corners or through little holes in the walls. Just about every single time, they got me because I'd jump. I was in a dark hallway separating 2 rooms when I felt something brush up against me from behind. I let out a short scream as I turned. In the darkness, I could see a tall figure standing in front of me. I laughed after seeing it, but then something unexpected happened. The actor started pushing me down the dark hallway. I could hardly see anything. I went along with it, thinking this was part of the attraction. I don't remember exactly how long I allowed this actor to push me in the darkness, but eventually, he stopped, and I heard a door close. Things went silent. I didn't know what was happening. I still thought this was part of the act, and I was definitely scared because it was pitch black. Then I felt hands grabbing me, but in a very weird way, not in a way that a haunted house actor should. I was being full-on grabbed, so I pushed the person off and said, "Get off me, dude." I stood there in silence now. I said, "You're going too far, man. You can't touch people like that," thinking this was still just part of the haunted house act. I waited, expecting the actor to guide me to the next part of the attraction or do something, but nothing was happening. Enough time passed that I knew something wasn't right. So I took out my phone, even though they told us not to take our phones out at any time during the attraction. I turned on the flashlight and found myself in a storage room with props and janitorial equipment. But I'd be lying if I said that was the first thing I noticed. The first thing that caught my attention was the tall man standing 3 or 4 feet away from me. He didn't look like an actor at all. He wasn't wearing a costume, just all black with a black face mask covering half his face. I looked for the door as I said, "What are you doing, dude?" He didn't say anything. He just started making these motions with his arms, as if he was supposed to be a character. I found the door and left the room. I used my phone flashlight to navigate back down the dark hall, the way we came. When I found the next actor, he yelled at me to turn off my flashlight. I told him I was violated and assaulted by somebody who may or may not work for the attraction, and that I wanted to get out of there. I could tell the actor was probably just some teenager not much younger than me. He dropped his character act and told me to keep walking that way, and that I was almost to the end. I asked where his boss would be. He said I'd have to go back to the ticket stand as the manager's office was attached to it. So I continued the rest of the haunted house, speed walking, making it clear I was just trying to get out. A few minutes later, I was out. I found all 3 of my friends who were confused about how I ended up getting out last. I told them what happened, and we all went to the ticket stand. I asked for the manager. The worker said he wasn't there tonight but would be back tomorrow. I told the worker about what happened, and she said she would alert the team. I requested my money back, and she gave me back my $30. The next day, a girl from our college whom we all knew posted on Facebook that she was assaulted by someone in the same haunted house the night before, the night we were also there. This was the reason the place was eventually shut down that month. When I reached out to her on Facebook, it sounded like we had the same exact experience, only the aggressor got a lot more physical with her. She pressed charges on the owner of the attraction for, I'm assuming, negligence. The attraction staff swore that the man who assaulted the two of us didn't actually work there. I'm sure that's true, but I don't understand how they didn't have proper security measures in place to prevent something like this from happening. History 3. This was the first and last time I ever went to a haunted house attraction. I live in Austin, Texas, and every year there's this big haunted house attraction that opens up. A few of my buddies wanted to go this year, and I figured it was time I finally experienced a haunted house. For a bit of early context, I had a very troubled childhood that's caused me to develop PTSD, but I'll get more into that later. It was a weekend, so nobody wanted to go into this sober. My friend Jake hosted a little pregame for all of us. It was going to be 6 of us, my 3 guy friends and 2 of their girlfriends. We all smoked and drank in Jake's backyard, everyone thinking it would make the experience more fun. We bought our tickets for the attraction on their website while we were pre-gaming. I rarely ever smoked weed because it makes me kind of paranoid, but I guess tonight I wanted to try smoking again and see if I could overcome that barrier. And I felt good, actually. I think the mix of alcohol and weed kind of canceled out the usual negative thoughts I would have from just smoking alone. Eventually, we called an Uber to the attraction, which was like 20 minutes away from Jake's house. There was a half-hour line. The place was pretty busy. We made friendly with the people in line ahead of us. I was pretty cross-faded, honestly, but I wasn't gone. I remember just about everything that happened. When we got to the front, I started feeling a bit woozy, but I didn't say anything to my friends. We entered the haunted house, and from the start, there was a lot of screaming and intensity. The actors were really good but intense, and it was starting to give me anxiety. I was starting to realize how not okay I was, and how much of a mistake getting high was. One of the haunted house actors must have realized how scared and quiet I looked, and he chose to get in my face, trying to scare me, yelling and making noises. I'm not going to lie. I was starting to internally freak out, but I was trying to keep it together in front of my friends. This haunted house was going on for what felt like forever, and in my condition, every single jump scare made me almost wet my pants. All the flashing lights and fog really made this whole experience even more trippy and surreal. We came to this room lit up with an eerie red glow, with a bloodied man dressed as a guy in a suit and top hat yelling at us, part of the act, but behind him in the corner of the room was a guy who wasn't dressed as anything. He was just standing there looking at me into my soul, and as I realized I was looking at the face of my father, I let out a scream straight from my stomach as I felt every hair on my body stand up. The room went silent, and my friends looked at me, laughing at first, thinking I was joking around. But when they saw I was serious, one of the girls grabbed me and asked what was wrong. I said, "It's my dad." I pointed to the corner where there was now no one standing. I remember all my friends and the actor being confused, and everyone could tell I was not messing around. My friends knew about my troubled past. "There's no one there," one of my friends said. The actor apparently asked my friends if I was okay. I was now in the middle of a full-on panic attack, yelling, "I want to leave! I want to leave!" Jake left with me through a side exit, and he sat with me while our friends finished the attraction. It wasn't cheap, so I wasn't going to make them all come out with me. As we sat outside the place, Jake told me I shouldn't have smoked so much as he tried to assure me that my dad wasn't in there, that it was just hallucinating. So, my father used to abuse my siblings and me. I'm the oldest, so I remember the most of it. He left us and our mom one day and never came back when I was 10. My close friends know about this to a certain extent, so I didn't have to explain to Jake. When our friends were done, they met us at a nearby diner where I was just trying to eat to help calm me down. I was embarrassed, but my friends didn't judge, thankfully. Not to my face, at least. I went home earlier than everyone else. I didn't want to spoil their nights. When I got home, I knocked out right away. I guess because of how drunk and high I was that night. I was having a nightmare about the scene at the haunted house and my father standing in the corner of the room. He was saying, "Wake up, Sam," and I did wake up. I woke up in my dark room in the middle of the night to see my father towering over my bed, looking down at me with his eyes open super wide. It was literally this towering 9-foot-tall version of my father, bending down with his body contorting in an impossible way. When I saw it, It took me a few seconds to digest what I was looking at, and scream straight from my stomach again. My mom came rushing in and turned on the lights, and the apparition was gone. My heart was racing, and my blood ran cold. I cried to my mom that I saw Dad. It was one of the most scarring nights of my adult life. I don't touch weed or any substances anymore besides light alcohol, and I'm never going to a haunted house attraction again after that.